美国1月17日星期五，参议院国土安全委员会举行了确认听证会，对当选总统川普提名的国土安全部部长南达科他州州长克里斯蒂诺姆进行质询。首先来看诺姆与民主党参议员的紧张对话。在听证会上，来自康涅狄格州的民主党参议员理查德·布卢门萨尔质疑川普新政府是否将对加州进行灾难援助。诺姆的回答巧妙而不失风度，让我们一起听一听。
I want to ask you about disaster relief. California is on fire. The fires raging there are going to leave destruction and devastation that is heartbreaking. I am really disappointed with some of the statements that President-elect Trump has made. For example, saying that, quote, we won't give him, referring to Governor Newsom, money to put out all his fires, and if we don't give him money to put out fires, he's got a problem. The specter is there of potential discrimination based on politics, withholding money from California or other states. It's not an unfounded fear. In the last administration, there were public reports about President Trump withholding money from the state of Washington because of his disagreements with Governor Inslee. Connecticut, like the rest of the nation, suffers from these natural disasters. Most recently, in August, we were hit by major flooding, and these natural disasters are going to become more frequent, as will be the need for the federal government to meet the requests for declarations of natural disaster. I assume you will agree with me that withholding disaster relief by President Trump or any other chief executive of the United States is a violation of his duty and of law.
Well, Senator, leadership has consequences, and looking at the tragedy that's happening in California,
I want to ask you yes or no, with all due respect. It's an easy.
What's happening in California is the ramification of many decisions over many years. But under my leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, there will be no political bias to how disaster relief is delivered to the American people.
So if President Trump were to say to you, we're going to withhold money from Connecticut or Michigan or any of the states, Iowa, because we don't like the governor or we don't like the politics of the state, you would stand up to him and say, Mr. President, we need to allocate that money.
Well, Senator, in 3 days, President Trump will take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law in this country, and he will do that, and I'll be glad to have him back.
And I don't speak
to hypotheticals, which is what you're asking me to do, but what I will tell you is that as Secretary, I will do the same. I will deliver the programs as the
Well, it's more than a
dictate.
hypothetical, with all due respect, and I apologize for interrupting you, but my time is limited, as you know, as a veteran of these hearings. It's more than a hypothetical. It's based on experience with President Trump withholding money from Washington State and elsewhere. I need to know from you, will you stand up to the President and say, no, the Constitution and the Impoundment Act requires us, for example, to allocate the $100 billion that we have just appropriated in the last session to states like Connecticut, $3 million, Texas, $10 million, almost every one of the states represented here. Will you say no to the President if he withholds that money?
Sir, I don't know about the scenarios that you're referencing with President Trump, but what I will tell you is that if given the chance to be Secretary of Homeland Security, that I will deliver the programs according to the law and that it will be done with no political bias. And if the programs change, or if you decide to change the rule of law, then I will follow that while adhering to the Constitution.
So you pledge to allocate and distribute that $100 billion
according to how the program is written, with no political bias. Every American deserves to be there and have disaster relief the same as their neighbors.
Basically following the law.
Yes.
Let me ask you, Senator Peters asked you about homegrown terrorists. The New Orleans tragedy was the result of a homegrown terrorists born in this country, radicalized by ISIS. And it reflects the reason why the intelligence community, the FBI, almost all of our law enforcement has said repeatedly, domestic violent extremism is the most lethal and persistent threat to our security. That terrorist was radicalized by ISIS. The investigation is underway. We don't know all the facts, but we do know that he was a military veteran, and ISIS was responsible for radicalizing him. Shouldn't we focus on ISIS as a threat to this country's security?
Senator, certainly we should be focused on all threats to this nation's security. That's the mission of the Department of Homeland Security, and homegrown terrorism is growing. We have more and more incidences. The tragedy we saw and the terrorist attack in New Orleans.
What will you do to combat it? What will you do to stop ISIS and other extremist organizations from radicalizing people in this country?
Well, certainly, Senator, I'll continue to work with the administration and our partners and the Department of Defense, the intelligence agencies, also within Secretary of State and the other branches and cabinet officials to make sure we're bringing all resources to bear to identify and to stop these types of terrorist activities. What I would say is the cybersecurity and intelligence elements that we have within the Department of Homeland Security have been incredibly siloed. They have not communicated with other intelligence agencies like they should and partnered. INA has some interaction, but not enough. And we also need to have CISA have interaction with the FBI, CIA to make sure they're working together to stop these types of threats and identify when they're growing among our citizens and how they become radicalized.
This area of questioning, I think, is supremely important. I know there's a lot of focus on the border. We all want more border security. We want to stop migrant crime, but let's not take our eye off the ball. The governor of Louisiana for the Super Bowl ought to be really riveted on the potential for homegrown terrorism as a threat. And I hope that you will help him and other governors to do their duty to protect the people of the United States from that homegrown terrorist threat.
而当布鲁门萨尔抨击川普政府让孩子与父母骨肉分离时，诺姆则直言不讳地反驳道：“参议员，川普政府从未有过家庭分离政策。”
In my closing minute and a half, I just want to call your attention to an effort that I've led to help reunite children with their parents, children who were separated as a result of the so-called family separation policy in the last administration. I have introduced a measure called Keep Families Together, not only to limit separation of families at or near ports of entry, but also the Families Belong Together Act for several Congresses to help bring the children, the kids who were victims of this policy and who still are not back with their parents. I hope that you will support that kind of effort.
Senator, the Trump administration never had a family separation policy. They had a zero tolerance policy, which said that our laws would be followed. What I'm alarmed by is the over 300,000 children that went missing during the Biden administration. And when we talk about children and what they're potentially facing as far as victimization in this country and the trafficking that's going on, this administration's lack of desire to find out where those children are or what they may be going through is alarming to me. So I want to stop that.
Because my time is expiring, I'm just going to interrupt again with apologies to say, let's put aside.
Well, I can't put aside 340,000 children.
Labels. Let's put aside what happened in the past. There are still 1,000 children who are separated and waiting to be reunited. I'd like your commitment that you're going to continue the effort to reunite them with their parents.
Senator, keeping families together is critically important to me and to this country. I'm concerned about Laken Riley's family, that they no longer have her. I'm concerned about the fact that we have people in this country that don't know where their children are, or people in other countries who sent their children here and they've been lost by this administration. So yes, my focus will be to keep families together. We will uphold our law and we'll make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our children safe from the trafficking and the drug epidemic that's hit this country.
I'm going to end on an optimistic note and say I take that as a yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
此外，当密西根州民主党参议员艾丽莎斯·洛特金询问诺姆是否会在移民问题方面玩弄政治时，诺姆的回应更是简洁犀利。
What we've spent the majority talking about today, crime from a migrant, and I don't dispute there is crime, but I just want to know, and I want to hear from you as an intelligence officer, that you're going to speak about real threats and not blow something up, politicize something, make something more exciting, because that's maybe what the president wants to hear, but your mission to protect and defend the Constitution means calling honestly what the threats are to the country. Can you just give me a yes or no, please?
Yes, Senator, I will be as transparent and factual every day with you and the American people as possible based on the information that I have. I don't know if the investigations are closed in New Orleans and in Nevada, but what we know so far and needs to be relayed to the American people needs to be the truth and facts.
Yeah, I'd ask that. We've talked a lot about border security. As a CIA officer, I think one of the only people on this committee who's actually worked on protecting the homeland. I'm a Middle East terrorism and militia expert by training, so I believe deeply in it. And every country of the world gets to decide who comes inside its borders. Mm-hmm. That's not a radical concept. Mm-hmm. But I think I've been open with this committee that it is also on us to fix the deeply broken legal immigration system. Mm-hmm. I'm glad to hear that you're going to carry out the laws on the immigration system. Democrats and Republicans are to blame that we haven't fixed this system. But I also believe you can't fully control the border unless you give people that we need for our companies, for our economy, a legal vetted way to come here. Mm-hmm. So do you believe in legal vetted immigration and that we need more of it in the United States?
I do believe we need to follow our legal immigration laws and that it needs to be vetted. We need more resources, I believe, in some of the elements of this to ensure
do you believe that our economy depends and needs some level, just like your family came from Norway and on economic, drive and wanted a better life?
Immigration's always been a part of our history and will be a part of our future. We just need to make sure that we're adhering to our nation's laws, which this body has the ability to.
I'm with you.
Continue to change and to put in place.
Again, going back to the fact that you will pledge an oath to the Constitution, not to President Trump, just like every other nominee. President Trump said in November that he is willing to use law enforcement, National Guard, or even active duty military to go after, quote, the threat from within the United States. I don't know exactly what he was talking about. But we have recent examples from your predecessors at DHS where federal law enforcement were sent into a state, in this case, Oregon, without coordination with the governor. Those federal law enforcement officers at the time were putting down threats to federal buildings, and they were legitimate threats. I don't dispute there was destruction of property going on during a bunch of protests and riots. So I don't dispute that, but they weren't wearing insignia. We talked about this. They weren't wearing any markings. So people were arrested by folks in fatigues with no names, no idea who they were, like right out of a bad Hollywood movie, okay? If the president asks you to send in federal law enforcement to a state without coordination of that governor, would you support that action?
Senator, my job, if nominated and sworn in as Secretary of Homeland Security, is to uphold the Constitution and to uphold the rules of this country. Yes, that will be the oath and the pledge that I will be making.
最后，再让我们来看俄亥俄州共和党参议员伯尼莫雷诺对诺姆的质询。当谈到有关前国土安全部长亚历杭德罗马约卡斯的任期时，这两位共和党人则毫不留情地唱了一出双簧。
First of all, thank you, Governor, for being here, for testifying before this committee, and for your service, not just to your state, but to America. 9 years ago today, we met and probably the coldest day I've ever been in my life in Iowa.
Yes,
As you and I were making phone calls and whipping up votes for Republicans in Iowa, my wife, Bridget, who's here, got a chance to meet you. And we left Iowa saying, that person's really going to go far. And here we are 9 years later. You've been an amazing governor, amazing congresswoman, and now you're going to make an even better Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. So I think sometimes in D.C. we tend to complicate things. There is a current Secretary of Homeland Security. So why don't we take this opportunity to do a little job review and compare and contrast him to you. So just if you don't mind, I'll ask you some questions and you can give me an answer. Secretary Mayorkas allowed you said it, just about 400 people on a terror watch list to come into this country illegally. If you were confirmed as Secretary of Homeland Security, how many people on the terror watch list would you allow into this country?
Well, Senator, we would work every single day until we had that number was zero. And if you look at the previous Trump administration over his entire 4 years, in comparison to Joe Biden's number, President Trump, it was 11 that were then removed from the country and face consequences. When you look at the 382 that Joe Biden has let in and the policies continue, is shocking and needs to be changed immediately.
Mayorkas let in about 12,000 murderers. How many would you target to let into this country?
My goal every day would be have no murderers allowed into this country in our communities.
Mayorkas allowed 16,000 rapists. How many would you target to let in?
Every day I'd work to make sure that there was none let into this country.
He let 600,000, Mayorkas, 600,000 people with criminal convictions. How many would you allow in?
We would work every day to make sure people are safe and that those with criminal convictions are immediately removed.
How many private jets would you have the United States taxpayers have fly into foreign countries to pick up people to bring them here?
Yeah, Senator, we will no longer be undertaking that mission at the Department of Homeland Security.
So not 700,000 individuals on private jets over the last 4 years. You would not have any.
No, I'll be working with President Trump to put in place his agenda in adherence to our federal laws.
And how many illegals will you plan to house in luxury hotel rooms in Manhattan at a cost of $6,000 per month?
Sir, clearly, Senator, during this election, the American people said they did not support that and that that would not be a part of this new administration.
How about sex change operations for illegals? How many of those would you suspect you would fund?
Senator, I believe that the Department of Homeland Security will be reevaluating its mission in this country to not allow that going forward under President Trump's goals.
And if you had an illegal migrant that was in this country and they committed a crime, would you offer them airfare from one state to another to evade law enforcement?
Sir, I will be following this nation's laws and the Constitution and make sure that all laws are adhered to.
And if you had been the head of the Department of Homeland Security a year or so ago, would you have closed a detention center in Georgia that would have allowed the release of somebody charged with a crime?
Sir, I don't have the specifics to that situation, but certainly that would not be something that I would want to have under my watch.
So just to be clear, Lakem Riley would be alive today if you had been the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Senator, my hope is that that would be true, yes.
Let's switch to another part of the disgraceful immigration laws that Biden and Mayorkas, who objectively, by the way, objectively has been the worst cabinet member ever in the history of the United States of America. Let's talk about temporary protective status. Temporary being the operative word. Mayorkas and Biden just extended temporary protective status again through 2027. Will you continue to corrupt TPS to allow some sort of open borders agenda? And will you use hot weather of 80 degrees and sunny beaches in El Salvador as a reason why people have to stay in America and not safely return?
Yeah, Senator, this program has been abused and manipulated by the Biden administration, and that will no longer be allowed to allow that and these extensions going forward the way that they are. The program was intended to be temporary, and this extension of over 600,000 Venezuelans as well is alarming when you look at what we've seen in different states, including Colorado, with gangs doing damage and harming the individuals and the people that live there.
And in terms of our border, like the physical border, I've been there many times, you've been there many times. Who should be in charge? Who should have operational control of our border? The United States government or the Mexican drug cartels?
Oh, Senator, the United States needs to control our borders and secure them.
So if this were a job interview in the private sector, and you had somebody like Alejandro Mayorkas in charge, and we had the opportunity to upgrade to you, this would be the greatest upgrade in history of the United States of America. But I'm going to end my time with a startling statistic and actually a challenge to the Democrat Party. When Mayorkas was confirmed, every single Democrat voted to confirm him. And 6 Republicans joined all 50 Democrats in that confirmation. If we get to the vote, and hopefully, Chairman, we could do that Monday, because we cannot wait one single day without you being in charge of that department. We should have 100%, 100 senators vote for your confirmation. This will be the litmus test, in my mind, as to whether we have a Democrat Party that's actually serious about doing bipartisan things like securing this country and protecting our citizens. Any Democrat that voted for Mayorkas that does not vote for you should be in front of their voters and removed from office. Thank you for serving, Brian. Thank you for being here, for putting up with the nonsense that you guys have had to put up with over the years. You are going to make an amazing Secretary of Homeland Security. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator.